boxing is one of the oldest and most dangerous sports in human history. It is a sport where skill meets violence, where champions rise, legends fall, and every punch carries the weight of consequence. Fighters risk their health, their careers, and sometimes their futures for a chance at glory. Most accept that risk as part of the game. But on June 16, 1983, inside the walls of Madison Square Garden, something happened that crossed a line that even boxing had never crossed before, a line between risk and sabotage, between competition and crime. What unfolded that night would not only end a promising career, but would force the sport to confront one of its darkest ethical failures. This is the story of Billy Collins Jr., a young fighter chasing a dream, and a scandal that shook boxing to its core. Billy Collins Jr. was born in Tennessee in 1961 into a boxing family. His father, Billy Collins Sr., had been a fighter himself, a tough old-school trainer who passed down everything he knew to his son. In their household, boxing wasn't just a hobby or a sport. It was a path. It was a life plan. It was a possible way out of the limitations and struggles that many working-class families faced. Collins developed fast. His style blended aggression with technique, and he possessed a natural charisma that audiences connected with immediately. Promoters saw it too. They recognized that special quality, that intangible spark that separates prospects from stars. Fans liked him. Broadcasters liked him. And as his win column grew, the buzz grew with it. By 1983, Collins held an undefeated record of 14 wins and no losses. In the fight game, numbers like that matter. They open doors. They attract television networks. They put a fighter within striking distance of a title run. For Collins, the roadmap seemed straightforward: get a couple more victories, gain exposure, work his way up the rankings, and eventually compete for a world title. At just 21 years old, he was young, hungry, and heading in the right direction. The future looked promising, and everyone around him knew it. Across from Collins in June of 1983 stood Luis Resto, a fighter with a very different career trajectory. Resto wasn't a rising star. He was a journeyman, a fighter who had been through the grind, who took tough fights, who had more losses than wins. Journeymen play an important role in boxing's ecosystem, often serving as tests for younger prospects. On paper, Resto wasn't expected to win. In fact, many believed he had been selected precisely because he could make Collins look good. Collins was the favorite, the undefeated up-and-coming attraction. Resto was there to push him, not to beat him. But there was one thing about Resto that couldn't be ignored. He was trained by a man named Panama Lewis. Panama Lewis was one of the most colorful and polarizing figures in the boxing world at that time. He had a reputation for being charismatic, knowledgeable, and effective in building champions. But that success came with whispers. Stories floated around the boxing community, stories about questionable techniques, shortcuts, and a willingness to bend rules that other trainers respected. Reporters didn't fully trust him. Rival trainers didn't admire him. But one thing could not be denied: Panama Lewis produced results. And in boxing, results pay bills, attract fighters, and keep careers alive. That reality made Lewis both influential and controversial at the same time. With Lewis in the corner, Resto wasn't just another journeyman. He was a fighter with a wild-card element, and Collins' team sensed it. To understand the fight, one has to understand the boxing landscape of the 1980s. Boxing was not merely about sport. It was business. Promoters needed television dates. Television needed audience-friendly personalities. Fighters needed momentum and highlight wins to build value. Collins versus Resto was never promoted as a war for legacy. It wasn't sold as a clash between equals. It was a developmental fight, a stepping stone designed to prepare Collins for bigger and more lucrative opportunities. Madison Square Garden, with its rich history and bright lights, was the ideal venue. A strong performance there could change a career. For Collins' camp, it was a logical move. For boxing fans, it looked routine. No one expected history. When fight night arrived, the arena buzzed with the usual excitement. Collins was the clear favorite, the undefeated prospect stepping onto the big stage once again. As the fighters met in the center of the ring and the opening bell sounded, everything appeared normal. But as the first rounds unfolded, confusion began to ripple through observers at ringside. Collins was being hit hard, noticeably harder than one would expect from Resto, whose power was not typically considered a defining weapon. Collins' father shouted instructions from the corner, noticing something wasn't right. Reporters sitting ringside exchanged glances. Trainers quietly asked questions. The punches simply didn't look or sound like they should. Despite the punishment and despite the growing confusion, Collins continued to fight with courage. Round after round, he refused to quit. He endured, he pushed back, and he finished the fight on his feet. When the final bell rang, he had made it to the end purely on heart and stubborn determination. At the time, few understood how unusual that really was. In boxing, fighters traditionally shake hands after a match. It's a gesture of respect, a recognition of shared struggle. But when Collins' father reached out to take hold of Resto's glove, what he felt changed everything. The padding inside the glove felt thin. Very thin. Alarmingly thin. He reacted instantly, calling to officials and demanding the gloves be inspected. Athletic commission staff surrounded the ring. Gloves were removed, taken away, and logged as evidence. The fight was no longer just a disappointing result for the Collins family. It was now a suspected act of tampering. For the first time that night, the true magnitude of what happened began to surface. The investigation that followed confirmed the worst fears. Tests revealed that padding had been deliberately removed from both of Resto's gloves. This was not wear. This was not damage from punches. This was alteration, intentional and calculated. And when that conclusion became public, more questions emerged. Who removed the padding? Did Resto know? Was Panama Luis responsible? Had this happened before? Soon another allegation surfaced that a substance had been applied to Resto's hand wraps to further increase the hardness of the punches. The commission debated over proof and legality, and the boxing community was left to argue over what exactly had been done. But suspicion alone was enough to fuel outrage. Nothing like this had ever happened on such a stage. The scandal became national news. In the days and weeks after the fight, doctors examined Collins and delivered devastating news. The damage to his eyes was permanent. His professional boxing career was over, not because he lacked ability or dedication, but because he had been placed in a ring against an opponent who did not fight within the rules. He was 21 years old, undefeated, and forced to abandon the sport that shaped his identity. In the world of combat sports, losing your career can feel like losing the structure, purpose, and discipline that framed your entire life. For Collins, the future was suddenly uncertain. The state of New York did not treat the incident as a mere sports controversy. Prosecutors framed it as a criminal act. In a groundbreaking case, charges were filed that had rarely been used in the context of professional athletics. Luis Resto and Panama Luis were charged with assault, conspiracy, and the criminal possession of a weapon, with the weapon in question being the altered boxing gloves. The court recognized that tampering with equipment in a combat sport could cause physical harm beyond the accepted risk of competition. Both men were convicted. Both served prison time. And both were banned for life from boxing. It was a clear message. In a sport where danger is already inherent, cheating isn't just unethical. It's unlawful. The story did not end in the courtroom. Collins struggled deeply in the months after the fight. Without boxing, the structure of his life dissolved. Training routines stopped. Goals disappeared. The atmosphere of the gym, the place where he had carved out his future, was no longer part of his daily life. Less than a year after the fight, Collins died in a car crash. Authorities ruled it an accident. Others debated the circumstances. But the outcome remained the same. A life full of potential was cut short far too early. Decades later, the scandal resurfaced through the 2008 documentary Assault in the Ring. The film explored not only the events of the fight, but also the lasting psychological and ethical implications for everyone involved. It featured Resto confronting his past and the family of the fighter who suffered from the events of that night. It also presented Panama Luis, who maintained his innocence and denied wrongdoing. The documentary reignited public debate and forced viewers to ask whether Resto had been merely an obedient fighter following orders or an active participant in the wrongdoing. The answers were not simple, and the documentary reflected that complexity. The Collins-Resto fight pushed regulators and commissions to reevaluate how combat sports should be supervised. Rules for glove inspection strengthened. Handwrap monitoring became more strict. Ringside oversight increased. Athletic commissions recognized that safety could not rely solely on trust and tradition. What happened that night became a cautionary tale, told not to sensationalize tragedy, but to remind future fighters, trainers, and officials that fairness is not a luxury in combat sports, it is a necessity. Billy Collins Jr. never won a world title. His name does not appear in lists of champions or Hall of Fame inductees. Yet his story changed boxing in ways that most champions never will.